Canada is not doing well. They're doing very poorly. And you can't look at China as the answer.
Donald Trump is expanding his trade war with Canada. From auto, he is now threatening the aviation sector.
This time taking aim at Canada's aerospace industry and Quebec plane manufacturer Bombardier.
The president is saying that the country will be decertifying Bombardier Global Express and all aircrafts made in Canada until U.S. aviation company Gulfstream is fully certified.
Every morning, Canada faces a new, unpredictable move from Donald Trump. But this time, his latest threat against the aviation industry didn't land as planned. Late one night, he warned that unless Canada approved certain luxury jets from a U.S. company, massive tariffs could follow. Right now, the world is witnessing a powerful lesson. Calm, strategic leadership consistently outperforms impulsive aggression. Trump may continue issuing threats, but each one carries less weight. Fewer people take them seriously, and the consequences often rebound onto him. This latest aviation standoff proved it. What was meant to intimidate Canada instead exposed Trump's limitations, revealed miscalculations, and delivered Carney a quiet yet decisive victory. Without Canada taking a single confrontational step, Trump arrived expecting compliance and left weaker. Carney acted with patience and precision and emerged stronger. That stark contrast illustrates the shifting balance of power in North America. Every move, every misstep, every calculated response is reshaping global influence, strategy, and economics. Stay observant, because the struggle over credibility and control is far from over, and the next chapter could redefine the rules of engagement in international politics. Lockheed Martin's $19 billion Canadian fighter jet contract is unraveling, but not because of technical issues or budget cuts. It collapsed because the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Ora, publicly threatened that if Canada didn't buy American jets, the United States could send its own aircraft into Canadian airspace at will. What was meant to intimidate instead backfired spectacularly, instantly destabilizing the largest foreign F-35 contract in Lockheed Martin's history. Within hours, Canadian Defense Minister Bill Blair announced that Prime Minister Mark Carney had ordered a full review of the 88 jet purchase. Canada is now actively negotiating with Sweden's Saab for Gripen fighters, securing only the first 16 F-35s while putting the remaining 72 jets, worth $16 billion, under reconsideration. What the U.S. thought was pressure turned into opportunity. Canadian leaders now have the perfect reason to cancel the contract, invest in Swedish jets, and keep production and jobs in Canada. A move designed to intimidate ended up strengthening Canada's independence and strategic leverage instead. The ambassador's words were blunt. If they're going with an inferior product, that changes our defense capability, and as such, we have to figure out how we're going to replace that. In other words, buy American jets, or risk altering NORAD, the cornerstone of North American defense for 67 years. What was meant to coerce Canada instead made the political choice clear. Take Swedish jets and produce them domestically. Canada had already wavered on the F-35 program for years, joining as a development partner in 2002, leaving, rejoining, exploring alternatives, and finally signing the contract in June 2023 after an open competition where the F-35 narrowly beat Sweden's Gripen. The Canadian Air Force preferred the F-35, and defense planners emphasized its necessity for NORAD interoperability. But now, a single miscalculated threat reshaped the entire decision, turning political pressure into a strategic opportunity. The deal was done until Trump's threats escalated. From calling Carney governor to imposing 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, hinting at 100% tariffs tied to a China trade deal, and now having his ambassador threaten to alter NORAD if Canada didn't buy American fighter jets. Each move backfired spectacularly. Every aggressive statement handed Carney political cover to cancel the F-35 contract, while Trump remained distracted insulting Canada. In real time, Lockheed Martin's largest export deal, $19 billion in F-35 sales, is collapsing. Diplomacy was replaced with extortion, and the consequences are clear. Sweden's Saab now offers 12,600 Canadian jobs to manufacture Gripen jets, while Lockheed Martin offers nothing but threats. What was meant to pressure Canada is instead reshaping North American defense, proving that miscalculated aggression can destroy even the most lucrative contracts. And Canadian planes might be decertified in the United States. On the surface, it looked bold, aggressive, and designed to force Canada onto the defensive. Yet within hours, his own administration had to clarify. Existing Canadian planes would not be grounded. Only future deliveries were at risk. The reversal exposed a fragile miscalculation. Grounding Canadian aircraft would have disrupted U.S. airlines, threatened millions of travelers, and angered American workers. Bombardier, Canada's aviation giant, employs thousands in the United States, and many jets rely on American-made parts, meaning Trump's pressure could have backfired on his own people. Legal and regulatory realities made the threat even weaker, as aircraft certification rests with independent safety authorities, not political leaders. In the end, what appeared to be a show of power revealed a harsh truth. Trump's threats are losing credibility, and against strategic leadership like Mark Carney's, they barely register. And now, Carney is turning this crisis into an opportunity to build domestic aerospace manufacturing, making Canada far less dependent on American defense contractors. But before we dive deeper, if you value in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay ahead of the stories that truly shape global politics. Here's what's at stake. In June 2023, Canada signed a $19 billion Canadian contract with Lockheed Martin to purchase 88 F-35A fighter jets, equivalent to $13.2 billion USD. The plan was to receive 16 jets between 2026 and 2030, with the remaining 72 arriving by 2032. Deposits for the first 16 aircraft, which are already in production, have been paid, and those jets are coming no matter what. But the remaining 72 jets, worth roughly 16 billion Canadian dollars, are now under active review. Defense Minister Bill Blair confirmed that Carney has ordered a full evaluation to determine whether the F-35 contract still serves Canada's interests, or whether better alternatives exist that offer greater value, domestic jobs, and strategic independence. This review is unfolding because Trump's rhetoric has made the F-35 politically toxic in Canada. Today, 72% of Canadians support either switching to Sweden's Gripen fighter or maintaining a mixed fleet, sending a clear signal that reliance on American defense suppliers is no longer politically acceptable. Canadian Industry Minister Melanie Joly is now meeting with Lockheed Martin executives, demanding real Canadian jobs and industrial benefits from the F-35 program. At the same time, she has publicly confirmed active negotiations with Saab, whose offer promises 12,600 aerospace manufacturing jobs in Canada to assemble Gripen fighters domestically. Lockheed Martin's response? Empty corporate statements about valuing partnerships with the Royal Canadian Air Force. No competitive counteroffer. No pledge for Canadian jobs. No recognition that its largest export customer is reconsidering the contract. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador threatens to alter NORAD if Canada doesn't comply. That's not negotiation. That's coercion. And it's reshaping the future of Canadian defense strategy. That's extortion. And it's pushing Canada toward exactly what American defense contractors feared: canceling the F-35 contract and building domestic aerospace capacity with European partners. Saab's offer makes this transformation tangible. 12,600 aerospace manufacturing jobs, full technology transfer, so Canadian companies can produce major Gripen components domestically, final assembly in Canada, creating a sovereign fighter jet production capability and maintenance and support infrastructure built entirely by Canadian workers. Compare this to the F-35 program. Over 110 Canadian companies participate in the global supply chain, generating $2 billion in contracts since the program began. But these are component suppliers, not system integrators. Canada doesn't assemble F-35 jets, doesn't control the technology, and relies completely on American supply chains for parts, maintenance, and software upgrades. With the Griffin, Canada doesn't just buy jets, it becomes a manufacturing hub, gaining control, sovereignty, and industrial independence. With Saab, Canadian aerospace workers would build the jets, Canadian companies would own the intellectual property for their contributions, and Canadian facilities would provide long-term maintenance, creating permanent skilled jobs. Saab is offering this because they need market access. The Gripen is a capable fourth-generation plus fighter, but globally, it's losing ground to the F-35. Securing the Canadian contract with domestic manufacturing would give Saab credibility to attract other buyers seeking alternatives to American dependence. For Canada, the Gripen solves multiple challenges at once, replacing aging CF-18 fighters, creating thousands of manufacturing jobs, building domestic aerospace capacity, reducing reliance on American defense suppliers, and sending a clear message that Trump's threats don't work. Defense experts insist Canada needs the F-35 for fifth-generation capabilities and seamless NORAD integration. But Canadian politicians are asking a different question. What good is the world's most advanced fighter if the supplier country constantly threatens your sovereignty and trade relationships? Trump and Ambassador Ora fundamentally misunderstand that defense procurement isn't just a military decision. It's industrial policy, job creation, and political positioning. By threatening Canada economically, calling Carney governor, and imposing arbitrary tariffs, they have made American defense contracts politically toxic. No Canadian politician can justify spending $19 billion on American fighter jets while the U.S. president publicly insults the country and threatens economic retaliation. Carney rose to power on a platform of reducing Canada's dependence on the United States, building alternatives to American markets, diversifying trade relationships, and strengthening national sovereignty. Approving 72 more F-35s after months of threats would contradict everything he promised voters. But redirecting that money to Swedish Gripen jets manufactured in Canada allows Carney to deliver on his platform, creating Canadian aerospace jobs, building domestic manufacturing capacity, and standing up to American pressure, all while remaining politically popular, even if military experts argue the F-35 is technically superior. The ambassador's threat to alter NORAD didn't coerce Canada. It made Carney's decision easier. If the F-35 contract is canceled, Canada can point to U.S. threats as a clear justification, turning intimidation into strategic advantage. Canadian voters are likely to support the decision because it signals independence from American coercion. In effect, Trump handed Carney the perfect excuse to cancel the F-35 deal, and Carney is taking it. The Canadian F-35 contract carries weight far beyond its $19 billion price tag. Canada was one of the original development partners, with domestic aerospace companies integrated into the global supply chain. Its participation gives political cover for other NATO allies to commit to the program, and losing Canada would weaken the entire international coalition. Lockheed Martin spent decades building this network, but the immediate impact is economic. Fewer buyers means higher per unit costs for all. If Canada switches to the Gripen, other countries watching Trump's threats could rethink their commitments. Denmark has already expressed second thoughts after Trump's Greenland remarks, and Portugal signaled plans to exit the program. If Canada follows suit, that's 3 NATO allies reconsidering F-35 purchases directly because of U.S. rhetoric, all while Lockheed Martin is forced to stay silent, unable to publicly criticize the administration responsible. Defense contractors rely on Pentagon contracts for 97% of their revenue. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick even described Lockheed Martin as essentially an arm of the U.S. government. Yet when Lockheed Martin's largest export contract began collapsing, all they could do was issue generic statements about valuing partnerships, while Trump's ambassador assumed threats would force Canada to comply. The lesson for the American defense industry is clear and costly. Threatening allied countries destroys export sales. Buyers with viable alternatives will choose partners who respect their sovereignty. Consider Ambassador Ora's threat in detail. It perfectly illustrates the strategic incoherence of Trump's approach. He stated that if Canada didn't purchase F-35s, NORAD would have to be altered, meaning the U.S. would need to fly more fighters into Canadian airspace to intercept potential threats approaching North America. Essentially, the U.S. was admitting that American security depends on Canadian cooperation, while simultaneously threatening to violate Canadian sovereignty if they didn't buy American jets. Strategically, it makes no sense. Canada controls the airspace between Russia and the continental United States. Any Russian bombers approaching from the Arctic must transit Canadian airspace before reaching American cities. That means American fighter jets defending North America still need Canada's cooperation, no matter which aircraft Canada operates. Even if Canada switches to Swedish Gripen jets instead of F-35s, NORAD continues to function. Canadian fighters will still intercept threats, preserving continental defense, making the U.S. threat not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. The F-35 contract decision deadline is fast approaching. Canada must either confirm the remaining 72 jets or formally notify Lockheed Martin of contract changes within months to avoid production delays. Carney has three options: accept the full F-35 contract and complete all 88 purchases, switch the remaining 72 jets to Swedish Gripens with domestic manufacturing, or create a mixed fleet combining F-35s and Gripens. Defense Minister Blair suggested the mixed fleet as a compromise, taking the first 16 F-35s already under contract while buying additional Gripens for the remaining requirement. This maintains NORAD interoperability and builds Canadian aerospace capability, but mixed fleets are costly and complex, requiring separate training, maintenance, and facilities. Historically, the Canadian Air Force resisted this option. The cleanest solution: cancel the remaining F-35s, pay any penalties, and redirect funds to Saab with Canadian manufacturing requirements, building domestic fighter jet assembly and maintenance capabilities. Trump's threats make this politically viable. If he complains, Carney can point to Ambassador Ora's NORAD threats, Trump calling him governor, and previous economic intimidation, framing Canada's decision as standing up to American bullying. Politically, this works, even if it sacrifices some F-35 technical advantages. Sovereignty and jobs outweigh aircraft performance when voters see threats to national independence. Meanwhile, Lockheed Martin's largest export contract collapses, and Trump is too busy insulting Canada to notice American defense sales evaporating because diplomacy was replaced by extortion.